Good morning, boys and girls, and welcome to Read Aloud Day. Awesome day. Can't wait to start because today we're going to start a series book. And as we're learning and reading, or going to learn and reading, a series book is many books that have the same characters. And today we're going to start Flat Stanley. So, just before we start, I want us to take a little sneak peek of the cover. Flat Stanley. I'm guessing this guy here is Flat Stanley. He is quite flat. Look at him. Look at his feet. Look at his legs. At bat. This is a bat. So he's playing baseball. Miss Sorrentino's favorite sport. So, we're going to begin reading. Before we start, I want you to stop and predict. Who do you think the main character is? Where do you think the setting is? Let's see. Flat Stanley at Bat, created by Jeff Brown. Stanley Lambchop lived with his mother, his father, and his little brother Arthur. Stanley was 4 feet tall. So 4 feet tall is like up to here in Miss Sorrentino. And a foot wide and 1.5 inches thick. That's like this big. He's that thick, boys and girls. So think about it. Miss Sorrentino's arm is this big. Stanley's is like this big. Kind of like a super thin notebook. I would say even skinnier than this. He had been flat ever since a bulletin board fell on him. So his brother's normal, his mom is normal, his dad's normal. Stanley's flat. But it doesn't seem to bother Stanley that much. He looks like he's having fun. Sometimes being flat was a bit tricky. When he turned sideways, Stanley was hard to spot. A good gust of wind could sweep Stanley off his feet, but he never let his flatness get in the way. So he looks a little scared there, but he never let his flatness get in the way. He never let his difference get in the way of what he wanted to do. I'm trying out for baseball, Stanley told Arthur one day. Arthur helped Stanley practice. Stanley hit 1,000 pitches. He caught 1,000 fly balls. And fly balls are when the balls just keep going. So it looks like Stanley is really working hard. Do you think he's going to make the baseball team? Says he hit 1,000 pitches. He caught 1,000 fly balls. What do you think? Stanley hard work showed at tryouts. Congratulations, said Coach Bart. You're our new center fielder. That means you play in the middle of the field. In the back. He made the team, boys and girls. Woo! Opening day was bright and breezy. Pause. What can happen to Stanley when it's breezy? What can that gust of wind do? Think about what happened in the beginning of the book and predict what's going to happen. The teams ran onto the field. There's Stanley, cried Arthur. He looks really excited. Mr. Lambchop snapped a picture. Mrs. Lambchop cheered. Hooray for the other players, too, she added politely. Stanley was the first batter. He stepped up to home plate and turned sideways and pulled back his bat. Now here you can really see how thin Stanley is. How flat he is. The pitcher squinted. That means when you make your eyes like this. This guy is so skinny, he said. I can hardly see where to throw. He threw a pitch. Ball one, said the umpire. That means Stanley didn't hit. Another pitch. Ball two, said the umpire. 2 more balls, and Stanley earned a walk. That means when you can just go to first base without hitting because the pitcher doesn't know where he's throwing it. Good job, called Coach Bart. Stanley's team played well. By the 9th inning, they led 6-5. They're winning! The other team had one last chance. Their best hitter came to bat and blasted the ball towards the fence. Just then, a breeze picked up. Stanley ran and leapt into the wind. Whoosh! Up floated Stanley. Plunk! Went the ball into his glove. Now, this is great for Stanley's team. But what do you think the other team's going to think of this? Do you think that it was fair or unfair? Great play, called Arthur. Not everyone agreed. No fair, yelled someone in the crowd. Are flat players even allowed? Stanley felt crushed. How would you feel if you were Stanley? That night, Stanley talked to Arthur. I'm a good player, he said, and not because I'm flat. But how can I prove it? I think I know a way, said Arthur. So, how do you think Stanley's feeling here? Look at his face. He said, I'm a good player, and not just because I'm flat. So it's not his differences that make him play better. He practiced really hard. So let's see what Arthur's idea was. What do you think Arthur thought of? Predict. Let's see. The day of the second game was bright and breezy again, but something was different. Stanley! Gasped Mrs. Lambchop. Her son was not flat. He was bursting out of his uniform. Let's look at Stanley before we go on. There's a scarf in the breeze. I see shirts. I see clothes. So what did Arthur decide to do? That's right. They stuffed him with laundry. My nice clean laundry. A sock stuck out of Stanley's collar. You see it? A purple frilly blouse, that's like a fancy shirt, trailed from his pant leg. That's my favorite one, said Mrs. Lambchop said. There was no time to worry about the clothes. A batter smacked the ball over Stanley's head. Stanley ran and leapt into the wind. But this time, Stanley didn't float up, and the ball didn't land in his glove. It sailed right over the fence. Soon it was Stanley's turn to bat. The pitcher had no trouble seeing where to pitch now. Strike one, called the umpire. That means Stanley swung at the ball and he did not hit it. Strike two! Strike three! After strike three, you're out of there! In the bleachers, Arthur gulped. He had made a terrible mistake helping Stanley unflatten himself? He's thinking, did he make a mistake? Stanley's not doing as well as in the first game. The last inning rolled around. The game was tied. Stanley came to bat again. He heard Arthur's voice in the crowd. Come on, Stanley! You can do it! The pitcher threw the ball, and Stanley smashed it! Whoa. How do you think he's feeling right now? Look at his face! The ball outfield. Bap! It bounced off the wall. The right fielder ran to pick it up. Meanwhile, Stanley tore around the bases. First base, second base, third base, Stanley was headed home. But so was the ball. Stanley, slide! Shouted Coach Bart. Arthur's heart was racing. So I want us to stop and think. This is a great part where the author showed what Arthur was feeling and did not tell. His heart was racing. How do you feel when your heart is racing? That's right, nervous. If Stanley were still flat, he could slide easily under the catcher's glove. But now, Stanley stretched out his arms and dove onto home plate. There was a swirl of dirt and socks. The umpire spread his arms. Safe, he called. Woohoo! Arthur hollered. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop clapped so hard their hands hurt. No fair, yelled someone in the crowd. Look at the muscles on that kid. Our player is that big, even and loud? Stanley grinned. It's another name for a smile. How do you think he's feeling? Are those really his muscles? No, those are the clothes. So Stanley proved that he was a great player, no matter what size he was. Small or thin or big, stuffed with clothes. Not so many socks next time, Mr. Lambchop called down to Stanley. Mrs. Lambchop looked at Arthur and no blouses. The end. I hope you really liked this book. Today I want you to think about what lesson we learned. Is it okay to be different? And do you think Stanley had a really fun time playing baseball? I think he did. I hope you really liked Flat Stanley. Next week we're going to read another Flat Stanley book because remember, a series book has the same characters. All right, boys and girls. See you next time.